Well, hello there, AP World students. This is Mrs. Dumas, and today I'm going to explain to you how to write a good DBQ. Now, a DBQ is called a document-based question essay, and what that really means is AP is going to give you a series of documents, and they're going to give you a prompt, and you have to answer that prompt using evidence from the documents. It's not necessarily a really hard process, but it's definitely detailed, and we want to make that process as easy as possible for you, so let's get started. So the first thing you need to know is that no matter what kind of DBQ you write, no matter what era, it's all going to be based on the exact same rubric. And the rubric that we use measures these 7 categories: historical context, thesis, evidence, sourcing, evidence beyond the document, and complexity. Now, for the sake of today's video, we are going to be talking about the first 5, and a little bit later on in the semester, we'll talk about the last 2. So step 1 in any DBQ is knowing exactly what the prompt is asking you to do. I've read the DBQ, I can't tell you how many years now as a national reader for College Board, and one of the biggest issues we see why kids don't earn points is because they don't really know what the prompt is asking, and so they can't write a solid essay. So whenever you get the prompt from AP World or your teachers, the first thing we want you to do is look for keywords. Then what we want you to do is know what the words mean, and then finally break down the prompt into a language that makes sense to you. So let's say you're given this prompt: analyze the similarities and differences in the mechanization of the cotton industry in Japan and India from 1880 to 1930. Now, when we look at that first, it is like, good gracious, that is one verbose prompt. There are a lot of words in it. But if we do exactly what we set up here, we can make it pretty simple. So here we go. Analyze the similarities and differences in the mechanization of the cotton industry in Japan and India from 1880 to 1930. Okay, so let's find those keywords. Well, analyze, that's always a keyword because that's what the essay wants you to do. So analyze basically means identify and explain. And then similarities and differences. So we know we're going to look for at least one thing that is similar and one thing that is different. And that has to result or revolve around the mechanization of cotton industry. So that just means industrial cotton production in Japan and India from 1880 to 1930. So once we've looked at the keywords and broken it down, we put it into this language. Identify and explain how the industrialized cotton industry in Japan and India were the same and different, or similar and different. So don't get intimidated by really wordy prompts. AP likes to do that. They're like, hey, how many words can we throw in here to try to confuse the kids? Don't worry about it. Just break it down the way that we've asked you to break it down, put it into a more simple language, and you will be set. And it works every single time. So now once that you've broken down the prompt, the next thing we need to do is read the documents and find the evidence that's actually going to answer that prompt. So you're going to have 7 documents in your DBQ. So in all 7 of those documents, you need to read them and find evidence in that document that actually is going to help you answer the prompt. Right? So what you do want to make sure is that whenever you do this, that you're finding the best evidence possible. So let's take a look at some documents. So here we have a document, and we always want to look at the source line up here. This is going to really help you, especially when it comes to sourcing your documents. So we know that this is data from the industrialization and the status of women in Japan done in 1973. And so then we read the title, Percentage of Female Cotton Textile Laborers, India and Japan, Selected Years. So I look into this document and I see, okay, 1909, 1924, 1934, and I notice that the percentages keep getting a little bit smaller each year. And actually that's a small percentage to begin with, 22%. It goes down to basically 19%. So I know that anywhere from 19 to 22% of textile laborers were women in India. Now, when I go over to Japan, I look at relatively close, not the exact same years, but that's not really going to matter. And I notice that the percent, even though it doesn't change much, is much higher. That about 80% of textile or cotton workers in Japan are women. So what this document is telling me is that there's a heck of a lot more women working in factories in Japan than in India. And that's what you have to do for each document. Let's take a look at another one. This is a picture, and this is from an official company history, Nichibo Cotton Mill, Japan, 1920s. So when you're looking at a picture, you first start by just finding out what you actually see. So I'm like, okay, I see, it looks like metal. I'm pretty sure those are machines in the background. We know that this DBQ is about cotton, so this must be cotton. I see 2 men, 2, 3, 4, 5 women. Okay, so this document is basically showing me that they're using machines to make, cotton in Japan, and it definitely looks like they're making cotton, and there's definitely a heck of a lot more women than men. So there you go. I've broken down the 2 documents. I found evidence about the mechanization of cotton. I'm going to do that for all 7 documents, and that will be step 2 complete. So then we move on to step 3, which is sourcing. And I'm not going to lie to you, sourcing is one of the hardest things to do with the DBQ. But if you just don't panic, take a deep breath, follow these instructions, it'll be much easier. So when you source a document, what that really is for AP is you are looking at a document more critically. You're not just looking for main idea. Like, you are taking it to the next level. So you can analyze documents for AP World History in 4 different ways. You can analyze it for historical context, purpose, point of view, and audience. So if you choose to analyze for historical context, basically what you're doing is you're just going to explain what's going on during the time period that the document was written that might be influencing what the document is saying. So let's say I have a document, let's do one right now, and the document is a picture showing people wearing masks. Okay, so what's going on during this time period that could explain why people are wearing masks? Well, what you could see is, hey, in March or February of 2020, the coronavirus hit the shores of the United States, and one way to prevent the spread of coronavirus is to wear masks. That's why we're seeing masks in that picture. So it's just providing a little bit of explanation as to what's going on during the time period that helps us understand the document. Now, purpose is, what is the author trying to accomplish? What does the author want you to think, do, or believe by having written this document? What's the goal of this document? What is the author really trying to get across? That's it. Point of view. Point of view basically is kind of discussing what an author's bias is and why the author would have that bias. And just so you understand, every single document, whether it's text-based, whether it's a chart, whether it's a visual, every document has bias. So never, ever, 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 ever say this document has no bias. And don't say that this document has bias, because AP scholars already know that. Your goal is to tell us what the bias is and why. And then audience is, who is the document being written to? How do you know that this is the audience? And why did the author choose this specific audience to address? Now, a couple things to remember. In the DBQ, you need to source 3 documents. We always recommend sourcing 4, just a little CYA. And then always pick the documents that are easiest to source. And when you source a document, you only have to source it for one of these. So let's say I take document 7, I'll source it for historical context. Document 2, I'll source for POV. And document 6, I'll source for purpose. Okay? All right. So now what we've done is we have read the prompt, we have sourced the documents, and let's take a look at what that sourcing looks like. So this is a document from Tsurumi Shunsuke. He is a Japanese industrialist circa 1900. Let's hear what he has to say. Where do the cheap workers come from? Well, they all come from farming communities. People from families that are working their own land or are engaged in tenant farming but have surplus workers, those are the ones that come to the cities and the industrial centers to become factory workers. Income from farms provides the family needs and subsistence of the parents and siblings. The person who takes employment in the factory is an unattached component of the family. All he or she has to do is earn enough to maintain his or her own living. This is why the workers' wages are low. This shows how important a force agriculture continues to be for the development of our nation's commerce and industry. Okay, So let's try to source this for POV. And again, that means what is the author saying and why might he be saying this? Okay, so we know that this is a Japanese industrialist, which means he's a Japanese factory owner. And basically what he's saying is that the reason that wages are so cheap for the industrial workers is because they don't need to make a bunch of money, right? Okay, they usually come from family farms, and the reason that they're no longer working on the farm is because the family doesn't need them to work on the farm, and the farms are providing the family with enough income and food. So when this person comes to the factory because they're not needed on the farm, all this person has to do is earn enough to make their own living. They don't have to earn extra money to support their family, so that's why wages are low. So that's what he's saying. The question now is, why would this person be saying it? Because he's basically saying it's totally fine to have low wages. Well, if he's a Japanese industrialist or factory owner, he wants to make as much profit as he possibly can. And one of the ways to make the most amount of profit is to keep wages low. So the reason he's saying that it's okay that wages are low is because it helps him make more profit. That's why. Now, do we know what he's saying is true? That the reason these people are coming to the factories is because they're not needed at the farm? We don't know that. We don't know if that's true. But what we do know is he's saying that wages are okay to be low. And the reason he wants wages low is because he's a factory owner. And that's how you do POV. So now we've taken the prompt, dissected it, know exactly what it's asking to do. We have found evidence in the documents to answer the prompt, and we have learned how to source documents. The final thing that we need to do before we move into the actual writing of the essay is to actually group the documents. So what grouping means is that you want to put like documents or similar documents together. So documents that are basically saying the same thing or documents that can be used together, they become a group. Now, to count as a grouping, you have to have at least 2 documents in that group. It can be more, but you have to have at least 2. So let's say you think documents 1 and 3 are basically saying the same thing. That's one group. Documents 2 and 6 are basically saying the same thing. That's another group. Documents 4, 5, and 7 are saying the same thing. That's another group. And you definitely need to group the documents because it's going to play a bigger role later on in your essay. And you always want to make sure to try to find at least 3 groups. You can have more, but we want to go for a minimum of 3. So now let's take a look at this. How could we group these 2 documents together? Document 7, which we've already looked at, and then document 8, which we've already looked at. What about these documents are basically saying the same thing, or how can these documents be used together? Well, in document 7, like we've already pointed out, there are a heck of a lot more women working in Japanese factories than in India. And then in document 8, we've already pointed out that this is a factory, it's got machines, and it's got a lot more women than men in the factory. So I think there is something similar that both these documents are saying. This document is showing that more women work in a Japanese factory than men, and this document is showing that more women work in a Japanese factory than men. So these documents are basically saying the same thing, and they can be a group. So that's what you're going to do for the rest of the 5 documents that you have. Put the like documents together. Put the documents together that are basically saying the same thing. So now, once again, we've read the prompt, we've dissected it, we've found the evidence, we've sourced them, and we've grouped them. And that's the basic work you have to do to prepare for actually writing the essay. But what I want you to do right now is I want you to pause this video. That is a lot of information to go through in 15 minutes. First, I want you to pause it. I want you to get up. I want you to walk around. I want you to grab a snack, use the restroom, whatever you need to do. Take 5 minutes for yourself. Then once you come back, I want you to go over the notes that you have for this first part of the video. Make sure you understand the notes. And if there's anything that you want clarification on, put a little star by it or circle it or highlight it, and then bring that question to me in class, or you can email me that question as well. So take 5 minutes for yourself. After that 5 minutes, we'll come back and do the second part of the video. Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. You are way too young to get that illusion, but welcome back anyway. So we're moving on to the next part of the video, which is actually kind of putting the essay together and start writing it. So the first thing that you're going to have to do is step 5, which is creating your thesis statement. And we have got a foolproof way to create a thesis statement that's going to earn you that point. So you've done your grouping, you've done all your analysis, and let's say you have this. You've read all your docs and your groupings are more women work in factories in Japan than in India. There's less cotton production in India than Japan, and that working conditions are both good in both Japanese and Indian cotton factories. Those are your 3 groupings. Okay, so here's all you got to do. To make your thesis, make each grouping into a prong and put them together so it looks just like this. Indian and Japanese mechanization of cotton was similar in that factory conditions were good in both countries. However, Japan had more women working in factories, and Japan produced more cotton than India. That's how simple your thesis statement can be. All I did was basically restate the first part of the prompt and then added the topics of my groupings. Now, I took out a few words, so it wasn't really verbose. I tried to condense it a little bit, but that's all you need to do to create an effective thesis. Restate the prompt, add the topics of your groupings, and bam, that earns you the point. Whoops, sorry, I went back the wrong way. So now we've created our thesis. Like, we're ready to go because your thesis acts as the map for your essay. Your whole essay is going to be about proving your thesis correct. So once we have that, we then need to get into the actual writing of the essay. And this is where you create your intro paragraph. And once again, we have a surefire way to earn you points. Every single intro paragraph you do for an extended essay in AP World History. And that includes the DBQ and the LEQ. Don't worry about the LEQ. We'll talk about it way, way, way later down the road. You're going to have contextualization, followed by transition word or phrase, followed by your thesis. Every single time. This formula does not change. So let's take a look at what this actually means. So contextualization or historical context, is basically background info that the readers need to kind of understand what the essay is going to be about. Now, there's a link that I have for you. Heimler's History does an excellent job explaining contextualization, but I want to show you how I started to understand contextualization. Do we all recognize this? And if you don't, you may have been living under a rock. Just kidding, just kidding. This is the scrolling intro to almost every single Star Wars movie from episodes 1 to 9. I think there's 9. I don't know. And so what this intro basically does is it provides you the background info you need to understand the beginning of the movie. So this one is from The Empire Strikes Back, and it's basically telling us, hey, it's a dark time for the rebellion. Even though they've blown up the Death Star and everything was supposed to be kumbaya, it isn't. We have got rebel bases throughout the galaxy. One rebel base is on the frozen planet of Hoth, and the Empire is hunting these rebels down to destroy them and eradicate them. And the rebels are fighting as hard as they can to stay alive. That's what this scrolling intro does. And that's really good, because if we didn't have this intro, if the movie just started as the probe is going across this icy planet of Hoth, we would be thinking, what? What in the world is going on? Where are we? What's that probe? What? That's kind of what you would do. So you needed this rolling intro to give you enough background information that when the picture pops up and you see the probe, floating across the icy planet of Hoth, you understand, oh, this must be Hoth. That probe is either for the rebels or the Empire, and someone's looking for something, but we know the rebels are in Hoth, the Empire's hunting them down. Let's go from here. So your historical contextualization in your essay is going to do that exact same thing. It's just for the essay instead of the movie. It's going to give your readers background information so they are not totally lost when they start reading your essay. So let's take a look of what contextualization could look like. So here we go. Industrial production in India began with British colonization in 1858. Once the British government took over India, cotton factories sprung up all over the subcontinent for the benefit of Britain. Japan's industrialization of cotton began with the Meiji Restoration, a movement made in an attempt to modernize Japan in order to avoid colonial takeover. And while India and Japanese mechanization of cotton was similar in that factory conditions were good in both countries, Japan had more women working in factories than India, and Japan produced more cotton than India. Okay, so right here, this first part, all the way up to here, this whole part, that is your contextualization. Because we know that the prompt is about the mechanization of the cotton industry, so we should provide our readers with some background information as to how India and Japan got mechanized to begin with. And that's what we did with this context. Notice in this contextualization, we provided some specific dates, we provided some specific country, and some content-specific vocabulary. That is really, really important to do. You don't want your contextualization to be too general. You need to include content-specific vocabulary, content-specific dates, in order to make sure that your contextualization is clear. And then, like I said for the intro paragraph, here is your transition, and then I have my three-pronged thesis statement. Bam! My historical context, my thesis, my intro paragraph is done. And you've done it right. Good job. So now, once you've got the intro paragraph done, the final step is writing body paragraphs. And for every body paragraph that you write for your DBQ, it follows this format. You're going to start with a topic sentence, and all your topic sentence is going to be is that one prong of your thesis. You have 3 prongs, you take one of those prongs, just write it right in as your topic sentence. And then you're going to follow that by using the strongest evidence from documents that are going to support your topic sentence. So if you're using 3 documents in this paragraph, you are going to use 3 pieces of evidence, 1 from each document. And then if you're using a source document in that paragraph, then you're going to include that as well. But I want to show you what that looks like to make it a little bit more clear. So here we go. Example 1. One difference between the Japanese and Indian industries was the amount of women working in factories. For example, there were a lot of women working in factories in Japan. This is also seen in document 5, where it's mostly women working in a Japanese factory. One reason for this might be that during the Meiji Restoration, women were needed more in factories. In India, only a small percentage of workers were women. Okay, so this topic sentence, I just basically restated one prong of my thesis. Then I have a transition, and then I have evidence from document 7, evidence from document 5, and then evidence from document 7 again. And we really do want to make sure that you tell us which document the evidence is coming from at the end of that sentence. And then here I have an HC to represent this is where I tried to do some sourcing with historical context. Now, the structure of this paragraph is really good, but this is not going to get you very many points. And I'll tell you why. Because the evidence is not specific enough for document 7, the evidence is not specific enough for document 5, and the historical context, while it's on the right track, it's not complete. So the structure is good, but we got to make this paragraph a little bit stronger. And that's what we're going to do with example 2. One difference between the Japanese and Indian industries was the amount of women working in factories. For example, over 80% of workers in Japanese factories were women. This is also seen in document 5, where it's a 5-to-2 ratio of women to men working in the Japanese factory. Now, one reason for this might be that during the Meiji Restoration, women were needed more in the factories because all men had to, at first, serve a 2-year military commitment. This meant that they couldn't work in the factories, so women had to become the industrial workers. In India, only a small percentage of workers were women, no more than 21% between 1900 and 1930. So during the industrial era, more women worked in Japanese factories than in Indian factories. Now, this paragraph is saying the exact same thing as the previous one did, but it's saying it better. Instead of just saying there were more workers in Japanese factories, we actually gave an actual percentage. We did the same thing in document 5. Instead of saying, hey, there are more women working, we gave a ratio, not a ration. Hello, typo. And then when we did our historical context, instead of just saying, hey, the reason more women were working was because of the Meiji Restoration, we actually explained that in a lot more detail to make it a complete historical context. And then in India, instead of saying only a few women worked, we actually gave the percentage. So if we go back and forth between these paragraphs, look at this one. True, not complete, not specific enough evidence. For this one, totally complete, totally specific evidence. This is the type of paragraph that we are looking for. You have a clear topic sentence, you've used evidence from 2 different documents, you've explained your historical context thoroughly. This is a really good DBQ paragraph. And so this is what we want you to accomplish with yours as well. So that's going to do it for today. We've basically explained the basic components of a DBQ, how to accomplish and write all those components, how to put the essay together. I hope that this has really helped you understand the DBQ in a little bit more detail, and it's made your understanding a little bit stronger. But as always, if you have any questions, concerns, or comments, you can always email me, send me a text through remind.com. But hopefully, you're feeling better now. I'm feeling better now. Until next time, I will see you later.